As Richard, yes, I'm Duncan. I'm 61 years old nearly, for those of you who don't know me, and started paragliding when I was 50, but been flying sailplanes from the age of 14 up to when I was about 28, 30 years old. Got back into aviation again with paragliding. So that was 10 years ago. This year I was 60 and wanted to do something special. And I'd thought about going to Brazil because I love flying XC, and I'd seen an article about the Fly with Andy tow operation. And I was on a plane somewhere back in February, and I opened XC magazine, and Andy's little brochure here fell out and landed right on my lap. So I thought, well, this is clearly fate, and I went home and booked it. So I thought, rather like other flying holidays I've been on to Bulgaria or with Lee Trihorn around the world to Colombia or wherever, that it was a flying holiday. But that was really my first mistake, as I found out later on. So I booked my flights off to Kaiko, and I'll just put up my slides now. So I just need to click on here to write. If I get something wrong here, Richard, just shout. So where is Kaiko? Well, Kaiko is in the northeast of Brazil. So we're right up here in the northeast corner. Is that coming up correctly?
Yep.
And I've lost my little arrow here, haven't I? And we're right over here in this top right-hand corner. I'm slightly puzzled because I used to have some little arrows here back and forth, which have now disappeared. So I have to go back to the top every time. Never mind. And Kaiko itself is a very small town. It's, as you can see from here, there's very few streets. This was the hotel we stayed at, and the airport's on the northeast side here. So I flew into Fortaleza, which is the third biggest town in Brazil. And I arrived there on the Friday. We were being picked up on the Saturday, but the flight times didn't work for me, and so I arrived on the Friday. So I woke up on a Saturday morning at 6:30 in the morning, and this was the view from the hotel at 6:30. People on the beach, people out running, sky looking not terribly inviting. But by 8 o'clock, it had changed to this.
Ooh, nice.
And quite a strong onshore breeze. I think if you look at this palm tree here, can you see my cursor if I'm doing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can see it's kind of blown right over on this side. It was really already pretty windy. So already I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting, little cumulus clouds out all over the sea. So the driver picked me up and drove out to Kaiko, which is 6 hours from the airport. Flat for the first 4.5 hours until we eventually saw some hills, which turned out to be Patu, which we'll come to later on. And what struck me on there was the amount of scrub very close to the road, where it looked like any way you landed, you're going to have to fight your way through it to get back. And it was like this for 200 kilometers. However, in the end, we arrived at the hotel, which Andy had warned in the brochure. It's not a tourist hotel, but actually it was just a very fine, basic, clean hotel. You have ensuite showers and toilets, and basic rooms, and breakfast was fine. Breakfast every morning. And then having got there, went down to get the briefing with Dominic Rona and Andy Flula. It's in the briefing, but they just went through the usual stuff. But they were saying that breakfast every morning, 4:30 in the morning.
What?
What?
No, so I was got up at 4:30, breakfast at 5, leave at 5:30, and you got to the airfield at about 10 to 6 because the airfield was very close. The hotel is here, and the airfield is just here. In this red arrow, you can see it there. So it's only a 10-minute drive to the airfield. So straight away, you realise this is going to be quite long days, But before I went, I thought, well, you're going to be flying a lot, you're going to be quite tired. But the first thing it says, you're going to bomb out a lot because the first 3 hours is just, you have to stay up. Anyhow you can, just stay up. And after about 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning, they would say generally it would be too windy to relaunch. So there was a certain amount of tactical stuff they explained, that if you took off in the morning and you didn't think you could make it stick, you wanted to land within the first 25 kilometers, because otherwise, if you carried on to sort of like 35 or 40 and ended up bombing out, you'd be very unlikely to get back to get a restart, because it was going to be, number one, too windy, and number two, they had 4 vehicles. But as people are taking off and making it stick, 2 of those cars would take the winches off and they'd already be out chasing for a retrieve. So for a number of reasons, you had to play it a bit tactically. The other thing was, if you were after really big distance, if you got to around 200k, if that wasn't enough for you, you didn't think that was going to be big enough, you needed to land, because any more than 200k and you could not get back the same day, which meant you were going to miss a day's flying because you're going to be on the road. So I wouldn't be too disappointed with 200k, but there you go. And there's other little things about find a road which they could actually drive down and pick you up. And the last warning they said was about at night. They said it gets dark here very quickly, and I'll show you that later on. At 5:45, it looks okay. At 6 o'clock, it's dark. And if you're at 2,000 meters in half down, that's 40 minutes. He said, so just be careful. If you're high late at night, make sure you're going to get down fast enough. So with all that in mind, up I was the first morning, ready to go. And this was the sky that greeted us on the first morning, which everybody was looking a bit disappointed about. The sea is over here on this horizon, and you could see during the day waves of lift would come in from, you could see the lines of clouds coming in from there. But about an hour or so later, half an hour later, sorry, it's starting to improve. And here's just a general view around in the morning. So we're taking off to the right of that frame and heading to the left. So here are the 4x4s they were using with the electric winches on. And they were really compact little units. You can see here, which they took about 10 minutes each day to bolt one of these onto the cars, about 10 minutes to undo them. Just had a simple tow bridle here with a pull release. And I watched my first tow of the day. And at this point, I realized that all the tows I'd had when I was learning years ago had been in pretty much nil wind conditions. and this wasn't nil wind. This was a gentle day, I have to say, so it was a good day to start on. But it still felt fairly wild when you got onto it, I have to say.
Can I ask what height you were towed to, Duncan, please? What's the average
So
height?
that day, it was around about 900 meters on that day.
Oh, so a decent tow then.
Yeah, 900 up to 1150. But I'll come to that one in a minute because I had another issue. So I went on my first trip. Now at this point, I'm quite worried because I always think I'm quite a fairly cautious, scared pilot. I have no idea what the terrain is like behind the takeoff, where we're going to be going, or what the landings are like. So the first day I'm thinking, okay, let's just go off, have a gentle look around, make sure everything is safe and find out how the land lies. And you could see from the takeoff, the landings were quite small. There were a lot of scrubby trees, just like in that video coming out from the airport. But anyway, I picked a nice field and put myself over it really nicely, and then came down just beautifully, really, as you can see. However, this small problem didn't last very long, as my friend here came up and made a small alteration.
Right.
Brilliant.
Do you not always carry one of those?
No. Well, fortunately, everybody there, I have to say, like Colombia, it's saying that everyone was so helpful. But here's my short explanation.
Okay, so first flight in Geico, first short one, first bomb out. I was expecting it. Here is the field that I was aiming for. It's not very big, but it's the only available landing spot. And unfortunately, just as the last minute, I just got pushed a few meters to the left, and my wing went over the tree behind. But anyway, all is fine. I'm packed up. We're walking back now. So back with the first day.
I think that's the one and only time I've ever had anything go in a tree like that, to be honest. But yeah, I was fairly happy with it, having seen how that first 15 kilometers looked. Which I think I can. I'll do this. Which I maybe will show you later on. So, what you also realised here is that when the first morning I looked around and saw the group of pilots I was with, Michael Sigel, Dominic Rona, Sebastian Benz, Philip Bula, Rafael Barros, Marcel Ochoa, the Brazilian XC champions, I couldn't quite believe it, because when I looked at some of Andy's other videos,
And
they were
Duncan
clearly,
Babington.
and me, yeah. So I was basically the only what you might call normal pilot there. And I was slightly surprised because the way it read in the brochure was that, you know, there were going to be quite a lot of people like me, but there weren't. And what came out later on that I can say about the XC camping Kaiko, if anybody ever goes, is it is largely driven by people needing to get big numbers for sponsorship, or because they've already done 450k and now they need 480. And it's driven a lot by those people and what they need to do, which sometimes means that objectives for people a little bit lower down like me might get slightly left behind, in that some days, had there been vehicles there, we probably could have relaunched later, but you couldn't because they needed them for the retrieves. But that was fine because it was what that was about. But it's just worth, if you ever think of going to that one in Cargo, it's worth just remembering that. And it's just very hard work getting up at 4:30 every day, day after day after day in 35-degree heat. So on day 2, I now got quite a nice cold and sore throat by this point. I think most people had when we were there. Could have been COVID, nobody tested, we didn't really care. And we woke up to a nice big cloud sheet all over the entire sky. And several of them had multiple takeoffs and tries to get away. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the right video here, but I'm not going to find it. And in the end, I took a tow, got up to about 640 meters. It was quite a low one. Release, took a very gentle climb, but I was quite nervous because I was down to the last 300 or 400 meters for quite a long while of that flight and ended up landing in this field here about 15 kilometers away from the takeoff again. So this was the second day and the second time trying to float along in these tiny little bubbles, taking off at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I was starting to realize that this is not going to be quite as, well, perhaps easy is the wrong word, but not quite as straightforward as I would have imagined. That's when I realized that for a lot of these guys, when this particular day, if they couldn't do 200 kilometers, they wouldn't even take off. And I realized that for some of them, as I said about looking for those big numbers, it seemed to have taken away a lot of just the joy of being in the air and just flying for the fun of it, because they needed to get those numbers, to get the sponsorship, to get the free wings, to get the money to keep going. But I guess they have other days and they have their fun, I suppose. So on day 3, we went out and it was very windy. I think it was the only day I nearly walked away. I'm just going to check my note here as the next day. I nearly walked away from the takeoff. Yes, it was. So on this day, I nearly walked away from the launch because I've seen 2 or 3 of the others taking off, and these are top pilots, and they seem to be having a bit of trouble with bits collapsing here and there. But then I stopped and just thought to myself, well, wait a minute, what did you actually see happen there? I thought, well, actually, nothing. Some of it looked a bit funny, out of shape, but nobody actually had a real problem. So I turned around, obviously, and did the sensible thing, went back and clipped in. So that day, Viv was just asking about launch heights. Okay, so that day, previous launch was 640 meters. That day, I was at 1150 meters, and they were radioing to me to release because they'd run out of cable. It was so windy, I never got in front of my takeoff point the entire climb.
Wow.
So when you release like that, it feels like you've just been shot out of the barrel of a gun, honest, because the thing surges up incredibly fast, and you just catch it, and it's all fine. I have to say, it sounds scary, but honestly, you just get. And I went straight off into a very gentle climb. Now I know it's quite a howling gale today, so we're moving. You've got to go downwind. You can never do anything but go downwind to find the climb. So by now, I was trying to work these little tiny lifty bubbles, just going down and down, trying to stay up for those magic 2 hours. And I had two guys in front of me. One, David Susadelli, got a mention I saw a few weeks ago from this trip. And I went with them, climbed up to about 1300. They flew off to another thermal. And in retrospect, perhaps I should have gone with them at that point, but I was lower. So I stayed with the one I'd got, went to go with them, got there, absolutely nothing. So ended up coming down and landing back by this little tree here, which turned out to be where every horse for like several hundred miles around seemed to use as its local dumping ground. But it was the only tree I could find, and I was there for about an hour and a half, so it didn't smell too great, but it wasn't too bad. That night, I think it was this slide here, or the previous night, Michael Sigella put this slide up. He'd done his modeling to show the theoretical possibles for the coming week. So they all thought Tuesday was going to be good, and it wasn't. The Wednesday they thought would be good. I got to 35 kilometers, so it was a good day for me. But I don't think anybody actually got away that day either. So on the Wednesday, the 12th, it was a national holiday, and there was actually rain on the takeoff on that day. And as you can see, the sky didn't look that promising. But this is Rafael Barros taking off on a not windy enough day, really. This is pretty relaxed, as you can see, really. But you wouldn't be taking off under that sky in the UK at 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't think. And that's I think that's Dominic Rona going off behind him. So this day, when I got on there, it was everything went wrong. I got a line over because I must have stepped over a line because I clear my lines in the morning. Must have stepped over a line or something. My glasses broke, I think. My radio was on the wrong frequency, so I took off. I realised I managed to get it back on the right one. But in the end, all was well, towed off to 900 and didn't get away at all. Again, landed that day after 21 in 38 minutes, so you can see it's pretty windy. These two took off, didn't get very far. That's Marcela Ochoa and her boyfriend Rafael Barros. Sebastian Benz got quite bored and decided to go to sleep on his wing. This is Michael Buhler, who's a team pilot for UP Province, I think it was. But nobody really got away. Only two of them did. And the rest of us ended up back having a barbecue back at the hotel. With these guys, I didn't believe I could get all these champion pilots cooking me a barbecue in the afternoon. So that day, so Marcela, Rafael, Sebastian, they didn't get away. But that day, two of them did, and they did 400 kilometers. So day 5, we get to day 5, and I'm now feeling that this is difficult for me, but every day I'm pulling a positive out of it, even if it's just the takeoff or the fact I did 30 kilometers instead of 17. And just realized that this is just going to be a long learning experience, because I realized that the way I was flying it wasn't right. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but it was quite strange because over here in Turkey, I'm quite relatively near the top of where I need to be. And suddenly I'm in this environment where I'm just nowhere. I mean, absolutely nowhere compared to these guys. But what you also realized was that on any day, there was quite, or there always is, an element of luck. So on any day, 10 of these world top pilots could take off. Only 2 of them might get away. But the 2 that get away, because you're going off so early, can do 400K or 500K. Another day, 4 might get away. But the top guys, obviously, they will get away more often than people like me. But there is still quite a large element in those first couple of hours. You're never more than 1 thermal away from the ground. So on day 5, my nerves are now under control from the rather exciting tows. And one of the reasons was that Andy Flula had their tow hitches. They had a little pin which you could connect into the speed bar. And he actually put my speed bar onto about 30% because he'd realised that my wing was a bit slower than the others. And that was causing me some issues. After that, I have to say, it was really smooth. So I think if anybody is on a tow in windy conditions, putting your speed bar in is probably a good way to go.
What wing were you flying, Duncan?
Delta 4.
Okay.
So day 5, I was feeling good, but first tow, nothing. Did 12 kilometers where Marcella was already landed there, so we went back together. Had a second tow, landed in the stadium about 100 meters beyond the takeoff, so I couldn't get back to the takeoff, it was too windy. Then had a third tow, couldn't find very much, but I had a nice little flight off to another riverbank. Oh, sorry, I've just jumped 1 minute. So that day, the guys, we were having this barbecue, okay? I think there were 5 of them managed to do in excess of 400 kilometers. And this was their view at about 10 minutes before it getting dark. And Marcelo just sent this message about, in the end, it's all about this moment, watching the sunset from the best point of view after crossing the whole tower. And I just did these 2 little videos here.
So this is the view from our balcony. About 46 Wednesday. You can see 3 guys in the air. Got another 10 minutes to fly these get down, and it's going to be dark.
So that was that one, and then 10 minutes later.
Basically, all the 5 guys just landed 5 seconds, and it's dark. I would be pretty worried.
How close can they go to actual sunset to get a record? Because I seem to remember Guy and Harry saying something about it. If you don't get down, if you're not on the ground at the right time, your record is invalid.
I think you're absolutely right, Viv, because I heard someone say, I don't know, but I did hear someone make the same comment, and I think it has to be within 15 minutes after sunset. So you can't go the full half hour.
No, I think that's probably right, because I think they were a little bit close. I think Harry said something about having to spiral down, otherwise he'd have lost his record.
Oh yeah, so that'd be a bit down. So yeah, so they had say 5 guys got away that day, and yet some of the XC champions didn't. You know, they bombed out after 10K. So that just kind of shows you there is some element of luck to it. But yeah, on the day 5, I had 3 tows, didn't really get anywhere at all. But landed by a very nice little river here. Then, you know, you had to be on the ball. So I'll just play this little clip first. Where's that gone? Sorry, I'm just trying to find a clip, which I'm not going to find now. Okay, so I was actually trying to land over on this side of the river here, and just as I got to the last section, the wind just blew me to the other side of the river, and it was a very small area where I landed, but it was fine. But it was one of those things you always had to be aware of there, because the wind was so strong and so gusty. You needed to have a plan B, really. And I remember coming down here and just thinking, no, not the water. But it was it worked out okay. So
What was the wind
I
speed,
think I did-
Duncan, when you were landing
I'll
there?
just explain.
Here's today's landing spot. The wind was really strong, and I actually intended to land over there, other side of this water. But the wind was so strong on the last turn, it pushed me here, and I could see this place is okay. It's a bit small, and there is a bank here as well. You can see, but actually, it was really smooth landing. I was really surprised. So yeah, I'm happy with that, and here's to tomorrow.
So yeah, sorry, Rich, you were going to say something.
Yeah, what was the wind speed when you were landing there?
About 25, 30 kilometers an hour.
Oh, right, okay, fairly brisk then.
Yeah, well, the other problem was you see there's trees and stuff behind me in the bank, but at the point where I ended up there, I didn't have any other choice. So it just kind of, well, we're just going to have to make this work. But I think Andy Flula told me on the first briefing, which is one of the points I was going to bring out later, that nearly all the incidents they have, bad incidents they have, are because of people trying to make low saves, but not for the straightforward reason you might think, but because of the wind. So at least I can think of at least 3 occasions when I hit a weak thermal coming to land, but you know that if you take the turn, if you miss it or it stays weak, 1 turn and that's it, your landing's gone. And like that first day, there was no alternative. So he warned us the first night, look, if you're down low, you've got to look at your kind of risk benefit. What are you trying to achieve? If you're only doing 50K anyway, what on earth is the point of taking a big risk? But that was really the problem. If you did 1 turn wrong, that was it. You were stuffed because everything had gone, and now you're just back in the trees again. That first day when my wing landed over that tree, my main concern was that it was going to get ripped by the wind blowing it so hard. So for a first day, my holiday would have been over, which wouldn't have been great. So day 6 was coming on. Started to feel a bit like Groundhog Day at this point. But this was the day when I didn't really know it, but I was going to get to 75 kilometers today. Richard, I'm just wondering, I've got another bar open. I'm just going to see if I can open it up and see if you can see this. Can you see that YP4 on screen or not?
Yeah.
Yes, yep, got that.
Ah, okay, good. Okay, right. So I'll put that down again in a minute. Which one is this? Sorry. So, sorry, yes, okay. Can I move? It's okay. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to pull it on the one I want, which is. Right, put that back there again. Sorry, I'm just going to move this around a minute. Okay, so. Yeah, so the next day, yeah, it's starting to feel rather more like Groundhog Day. It was a 6:10 arrival at the landing field at the takeoff, and birds were already circling, queues are forming, and at 7:20, which is my earliest takeoff, I took off and landed straight back on the runway. Didn't find anything, but managed to get a second tow straight off and found a tiny bubble, and just stayed with it, just sniffing my way along. And the previous day in Bula, I was talking to him and said, Martin, can you help me? I'm really struggling with this at the start. And he pointed to some smoke in the distance and said, well, just watch that smoke, Duncan. He said, look, it's flat, 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 flat. And he said, look, there, it's just popping up. He said, when you're in that bubble, just imagine you're in that flat smoke and you've just got to wait for it to pop. Just stay with it. So the next day I tried to remember this as far as possible, and went off fairly early and just tried to feel as much as I possibly could the pressure in the wings. And I just decided to ignore all the instruments except the beep. I didn't look at any numbers, nothing, just feeling the pressure in my fingers and listening to the beep. And gradually it started to work. And that day I did a 75-kilometer flight from Kaiko, heading west past Brazier de Cruz. In fact, I'll just bring this down. You'll see that the general route, if you carry on that way, it comes out to Quijada, which is just over here. And here is Patu here, which is another mountain we'll come to in a minute. So that day it took me an hour probably for the base to get up to 1,300 meters from an 840 takeoff. Always in sight of a landing, never managing to get as high as you like. Eventually the base got to 1,400. I saw the hill at Patu coming up just to the south of where I landed. And it all seemed to be going okay. And then I just suddenly fell out of the sky. And in 7 or 8 minutes, I was on the ground. But I was very happy because at least this day to get somewhere at last, and met this wonderful guy, Francisco, who is probably one of the poorest people I've ever met when I've landed in flying, who is such a great guy. Took me in, immediately made me coffee, gave me his Wi-Fi, and I was there for about an hour, and we're still in touch now because he was such a very nice guy. So this day after I'd landed in the morning, when I went off, Marcella was running around. Are you still there, Richard?
Yep.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see. Why can't? Oh, I know why it was done. It's called done this. Sorry. Yeah. So after I landed this morning, I remember that in the morning, Marcella Ochoa was running around like a headless chicken, and I could see something was wrong. I said, Marcella, what's wrong? She said, oh, I don't have a cable to connect my battery pack to my instruments. I can't do it. I have a record today. So I said, which cable do you need? So she told me, oh, I have one, take it. And that day, flying with her boyfriend, Rafaela, she set the world record for the women's declared flight to goal. So I felt very proud. I'd helped her there by lending the cable. And when she got back 2 days later, she actually came and found me and said, Duncan, thank you so much. She said, without that cable, my flight was finished. So that cable is now securely tied in the back of my harness as a little good luck token, and it won't be going anywhere for a while. On day 7, a lot of guys from Norway who were here left us this day, and it was quite quiet then on the takeoff because of the number of people who'd gone. And they were only flying with towing with 2 winches on this day because there were fewer of us. And it was one of those days again when we were talking about risk. I flown about 20 meters down the road, and I was with another guy who is virtually the same height as me, maybe 20, 30 meters above me. And I saw a lake where I would often, and I landed and he flew straight on downwind. And I looked where he was going and just thought I just couldn't do that. Now, as it happened, he found the climb and he got away, but he had to land at 75 kilometers. So again, I thought afterwards, well, I'm glad I didn't do that, because if I'd done it and not got the climb, I'd have been really cross with myself for putting myself in a tricky position. That day, when I was flying 75K, no, sorry. So day 8, I tried to talk again to some of the other really good guys. They've got some more tips to try. I said, okay, now I'm trying to feel in touch with the air mass. I'm trying to ignore the instruments early on. And they're saying that really all you can do is keep trying to do more of the same, really. And so I'm just trying to see, so I've just lost myself here. I'll just quickly show you this little video here. So this is a moment when Marcella went to her record. You see there's a blue arrow approaching the purple line. 456.5K that day. So
Wow.
the other day after that, this was the only slightly irritating man I met who just completely ignored me when I landed by his farmhouse one day. So I thought, well, this guy just ignoring me, he's clearly not very happy. So I'll just walk up to that barn over there and sit down. So I walked up to an old deserted barn and dumped my kit on the floor and turned around, and then my new little friend for the next hour or two. So Jacarara Viper was just quite happily sleeping in the corner, and for the next hour, just sat there watching me. I was watching it, or him, or her, and it just the entire time I was there.
Is it
So on
deadly?
the not to humans, no, they are poisonous, but they might cause a real problem for a child, but not for an adult, I don't think. But they're very useful for medicine, apparently. They use them a lot in medicine. So on, so I just got to find my way here. Michael Sigel was going on this day as well, so I just got a quick picture with him, as you would. And then I can see, okay, let's see what I've done here. Sorry, I just need to go back and find something for you a minute. Not being used to how some of this stuff works is a problem. So it's going to be. Okay, so I've not been used to this. I can see what I've done. So I've deleted a video which I wanted to show you. I don't think I can find it. Let me just have a quick look. It was of a landing which one of the guys videoed me coming into land. Unless it's on this one. Look.
Not to worry, Duncan.
No, sorry, it was just interesting because it was just one way you could actually see me landing in a high wind, but it's not going to be there now. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the other one. See what I know. So yeah, so on
Recently deleted too.
yes, I think I've already emptied my trash, unfortunately, that's the problem. Never mind. Not to worry. So last day, on the drives back, I mean, you're often going through. So this is a car wash on the way back, Brazilian style, just parked in the middle of the river. So one of my drivers, Fernando, just picking up pilots as we go along. Everybody was always so helpful. They'd always get you coffee and something to eat while you're waiting. This is a guy here, Emil, who was there with another two Italian guys. A couple of cowboys that we met on the way around. And this was for, so it was there. So this was on about day 8, I think, and I knew it was pretty windy because I could see the palm trees getting blown over. And the lad in the house where I landed videoed me, so it cuts away just near the end. It does come back, but you can see there's not a lot of forward movement going on. And I picked a huge field because I knew it was going to be a bit tricky. Just hit down, it just went backwards and I caught my heel. As soon as that happened, the first thought that went through my head is, you've got to get on your feet and get that wing down. So it was quite a smooth, like just straight over and back up again. But they're all very helpful as usual. And then we had a long drive back. This is the sort of stuff you can be driving through for an hour or two on any given day. So it does get quite tiring. I mean, if you're sleeping well because of different time zones, or you're not feeling well, you need to kind of take that into account every morning when you get up to ask yourself how you feel, really. But generally speaking, all good. Marcella and Raphael left that day, so I got a photograph of them again, as you would. And then the day after that, first flight I did, I landed on my good day. This was. I landed first time near Mark Nicol here. His grandfather was in the field at the time. So he's a charming old man, but unfortunately he couldn't tell me the way across the river, which made me take a bit longer to go out. But I got back for a second takeoff, and that day it went right. It was a late takeoff for me. Timo Leonetti joined us this day, and I think he flew nearly 500 kilometers this day. So this was Monday the 17th on what was to turn out to be my last day, though I didn't know it at the time. So up to this point, I hadn't been doing a lot of photography because I wanted to just concentrate on flying, and I was anticipating doing some more later in the week. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, so I had to leave. So this was last flight now, and this is when I just realized it was starting to come good. But you can see here, we're flying down, this is around 50K, a bit further. But you can see that the general vista, all this brown stuff, is little trees. And you can see that after this line here, there aren't many gaps for quite a long while. So if you go on all the time, you've got to be planning which way you're going to be getting to. So I got this video here. I think, sorry, so I got this video here. So this is me when I realise things are going reasonably well at this point.
Okay, so I'm just on 99.25 kilometers now, and the wind direction is pretty good. It's blowing straight down this tarmac road. It's a bit of a rarity here in Brazil. So I was slightly taken by surprise today. Didn't think I was going to get this far. Now I find myself not too well mentally prepared. But anyway, I'm happy, and hope all goes well. See what we can do today. Been flying 2 hours and 2 hours and 38 minutes for 100 kilometers. It will be. So yeah, that's over 100 in 2 hours and 37 minutes. So pretty happy with that today. Really didn't think that was going to happen. Anyway, now I've got to get back and concentrate on the flying again. See you later.
So as I just touched on there, I'd realised the flight was going quite well, but I also realised I wasn't feeling particularly great. I think it was just a slight general tiredness, to be honest, and just doing this day after day. The area actually I showed you before in this picture, this was at 150K. Just to the left-hand side, there's a huge lake, and all you can see is brown and trees. And obviously, I've never flown this area before. I have no idea where the next descendings are. I'm at 150K. I know I can get back to the hotel the same day. I know that if I go on and end up landing just after 200, which isn't much good to me because that's not enough, I'm not going to get back the same day, and I'm going to miss the next day's flying. So I thought, right, well, do you really think you've got another 4 hours left in you, which it could easily have been? The conditions were fantastic. I mean, I couldn't come down really. And I just thought, no, I don't think I have. And to be honest, I think that's probably only the second time in my flying I've ever thought that. But I just thought, if you go another 4 hours and have an accident at the end of it because you mess up the landing or something else, I will be so cross with myself, I couldn't tell you. So I opted to land. So I looked around for a big area because I know this is going to be quite on, as you can see here. So I opted for a huge landing area because I know it's going to be really windy, and I could see several trees and fences, which if I thought as I got a bit lower, it was going to get really bad, I could get myself against a fence or against a tree to make sure I didn't disappear off down the field. But getting down was really difficult.
What height was that cloud base, Duncan?
That day we were up to about 1700, I think we were then. And it cuts off just before the end as my feet touch the ground. it was really getting quite adventurous at this point.
It looks it.
And in fact, just after I touched down here in this lovely, nice big field, which was okay in the end, I packed everything up, and just as I stood up and got my rucksack on my back, a massive dust devil came right through the field, and I was in the middle of it, and it was just like some scene out of a horror movie. I was just surrounded by all this swirling, flying debris and straw and everything, and it just made you realize again that, wow, that was kind of lucky. You know, if that had gone off just as I've been coming into land, it was a huge field. Probably I could have just gone downwind if I had to. But it did make you realise that you've always got to be careful. And just like here in Turkey, the first thing I want to do when I land is not mess around, is just unclip my harness, because as soon as you're out your harness, you're not at risk anymore. And I just say to any of you flying in, like over here in Turkey or in Brazil or somewhere like that, just when you land, just get out your harness, because as soon as you're out of that, you're safe. So then I had to go and find a house, and you're confronted with this dead straight road. Not, I'd noticed there were some houses just down the end of it, but just this dead straight road. And the trouble was, it's just like sand off the beach. Walking through this stuff, it's like trying to wade through treacle. You know, it's really hard work. So I was glad it wasn't going to be too long. So got down to the house, hear the telly on and everything, doors open, dogs running around, didn't want to go in case the dog got funny. So walked off to another house, but then the guy found me, took me back. Turned out his dad was asleep in the hammock watching the telly, but he didn't hear me. Got the proverbial Wi-Fi again, and the guy, my retrieve, was there within 15 minutes, I guess, after flying 150k. And I was back at the hotel that night. I'll just show you this little video of their house. So just a nice little array of Brazilian chickens.
Get bored, go next door, and what do you get?
And if they're bored, they can go next door and watch the telly. But lots of places in Brazil are like this. So what
Duncan.
I didn't know at this point, sorry, go on.
Duncan, when you're landing in these strong winds, did you have any special technique when you actually touch the ground? What do you do? Grab the rear risers or?
Yeah, so for me, I can do that, but I've always found it slightly tricky actually making sure I hit it first time, really. To be honest, I've found that for me, what works best is when you touch down, keep going down. So I will go down on my knees as far as I can, and then quickly spring up and step towards the wing or run towards the wing. And for me, that works, because just by giving it that extra half a meter, you spring up, run towards it, and you've just taken the main force out of it. But
Yeah.
funny you should ask that, because on what was to be my last day, though I still didn't know it at this point, I did ask one of the guys to just take a couple of pictures on me on the takeoff. The guy who took these is called Lewis Tapper, and he set the world record for open distance by New Zealand national on this day or the next day. So this is just the takeoff area. You see the retrieve and winch trucks at the back here. There's a big stadium behind here where you can land sometimes if you can't quite make it back to the takeoff area for a quick restart. Just clipping in. I mean, you can see the tow bridle here, and this is your connector here onto the winch. So when you release the tow, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, I'm going to pull this red handle just here, you can see, and it's going to pull the pin out, which will release this connecting line here. When it does that, the wide bridle, which is like that, once the pin comes out, it falls open to either side. So once you settle yourself down, you can just tuck it back inside your harness each way. And this was the, you know, by the few days, my Cobras have got to this stage.
Nice.
This was another day, actually, I didn't get far in front of the takeoff. So I remember that takeoff quite well. But I mean, the angle of attack relative to the airflow is obviously normal, but the angle of attack, the angle compared to the ground is definitely not normal. But this day, you're just asking there about high wind landing techniques. So this day I was coming into land and I'd only gone a short distance, which is 21k in 37 minutes. So it's quite windy again. And just as I came into land, literally as I made the last turn, I saw everything on the ground spinning. And I just thought, shit, I can't land there. I've got to go to the back of the field. It was quite a big field, but I knew the back of the field was rough. I could see 2 trees, so I thought, right, I'm going to put it down by the trees. So if it does get picked up, I've got something hopefully is going to get blown into. I landed, got blown backwards, and unfortunately, the bit I could see was a bit rough. It was like where it must have been very wet. And it got shut like this. This stuff had dried like rock, and you can see lots of it had bits of rock in it. So I did really belt my shin and my arm, as I explain here, I think.
Okay, so here I am. It's day 10.
I know, sorry, that was in a minute I should have. So I did, that was the one time I did get slightly hurt. I mean, I was wearing a long sleeve top and it shredded my right forearm with a reasonable amount of blood running down it. And that was through a long sleeve top. The top wasn't damaged, strangely enough. But I was quite green for about a week after that, down one arm and a leg. And those times you realise, yeah, okay, it's just luck whether you break a leg or you don't, to be honest. I mean, if you hit it a bit hard in the wrong place, that's it, isn't it? It's easily done. So I picked myself up, traipsed off to the nearest farmhouse, and this is what I found.
Okay, so here I am. It's day 10, I think, today. I just landed in a field not far from Duncan. Nearly got hit by a dust devil on landing, so just had to quickly divert to a rocky area. Got a little bit beaten up. Come to this farmhouse here, which is all beautiful and idyllic. Except for the small problem, there doesn't appear to be anybody here right now for the Wi-Fi. And I don't have any phone signal. So I'm going to try and see if I can see another house. If I can't, I might just sit here because my Garmin is sent a signal to say I landed safe. And then I have the coordinates. So I'll just see how it goes. Anyway, it was all fun.
But luckily for me, I walked down the road. I climbed onto the by the side of the roof of the house, and I could see a big building just down the road. Walked down there, turned out to be a cheese factory, and nobody seemed to speak English, and they disappeared inside. And then this charming young lady came out and said, "Good afternoon, can I help you?" Or "Good morning," rather, in perfect English. Said, "I work for a bank. I'm just here sorting out a deal." So anyway, she was able to direct me to a house nearby with Wi-Fi, and I got picked up. When I was picked up at that time, I just got a message from my brother when I was in the car. That was in the morning, to say my father was very ill. And I decided to go back to the UK at that time. So, and that became my last day. But I had learned a huge amount in this time. And I'll just go back to,
It seems to be a different sort of flying, Duncan, with a lower than I would have expected cloud base.
well, the thing was, I'll just show you these last few slides. I'll come back to you, Richard, if I may.
Yeah.
Those of you who get Cross Country Magazine, last issue, number 236. If you turn inside, you'd have seen this lady here, Verena Seagull. That day I landed at 150. She did 400 and, I think, was it 450 something? 458.
Yeah.
Thought to be the longest flight on an ENC glider. Timo Leonetti flew more than 500 on 2 days. And as I said, Marcella set the Brazilian, the world record, rather, declared flight to gold. So it was nice to see those when we got back. And it was, I'll just stop the sharing, go back to him. Yes, it was a different sort of flying. I think that's why Richard asked me to just give a talk, because I said I thought I was going on a flying holiday, and it was basically a flying boot camp. But flying with those guys, I have to say, I mean, they were all world-class pilots, apart from me. And being able to talk to, I don't know any other sports where you can just mix with these people just like they're the same as everybody else. And they're all so helpful and patient. I think the fact that I remain cheerful every day, despite getting beaten up every day and not perhaps achieving as much as I'd like, I think they sort of had a sort of amusing respect for that in the end, and wondered who else this stupid man from England was that had come in amongst them. But I was glad I put this talk together, because I said to my wife last night, I just put it on a slideshow on my phone. I'd already forgotten how much fun I had there and how much I learned. And I've already said to Andy Flula, I think I will go back next year for one more try, because I just feel it's like unfinished business. I know I can fly 300K. It's just having the right day for me. Unfortunately, I thought I was going to have another 5 days and I didn't. Otherwise, I think I would have. I was just starting to get the idea of it. When you say about the low cloud bases, I mean, I don't know anywhere else in the world you can take off at 6:45 in the morning and find thermals.
No.
They're just these little bubbles, and you just have to stay alive until 9:30ish, and then it starts to go up and start to get working, and then it's like happy days, off we go.
What
But-
marks the lift for you, Duncan? Because looking at some of the photos, there didn't seem to be clouds in the way that we would expect to see clouds here. So are
I'd
you
say
hunting
it was-
blind or not?
Yeah, I'd say it's 50-50 Viv, really. So some days there were nice little queues around and birds. There were always quite a lot of birds in the takeoff, not so many later on, funnily enough. But some days there weren't. There was, like that slide I showed you of the first morning sky, that general greyness. It was often like that. I mean, if I just go back to the one on this last one, you'll see. Let's pull up this last video for you.
You're becoming an old hand at this, Duncan.
This one will turn around in a second, so just bear with it. I mean, this sky doesn't look very promising, does it? There's a lot of high clouds. There's some clouds over on the left, but that's not where we're going. We need to be back more behind us. I mean, you wouldn't really think there's going to be a lot there, would you?
No.
But you can just find these bubbles, and it seems to be just stuff rolling in from the coast along the ground, which eventually will get heated up enough to leave the ground. But until then, you're just rolling with them, and the lift is very weak. I mean, half one up maximum. And I say you're only ever one sink out from the ground. It's a constant stress, I have to say, because you're aware that the first time you make a mistake, that's it, you're going to be on the ground.
Do they fly sailplanes in the area or somewhere around? And if so, what do they do?
Not that I'm aware of, I'm just thinking, not that I'm aware of, no.
Because if you can
So
get
no.
massive distances on a paraglider, you'd almost think that
Oh God, yeah.
people would fly other
do an
things
Andrew
like
turn.
hang gliders or something else.
Yeah, I suppose we're more dependent on the wind, aren't we, really? Whereas the others perhaps would rather less wind and do a anchor return or a triangle, I guess. Yeah, whereas the only way we're going to go a long way is with the wind, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, for those people chasing distance, I thought it was good. I have to say about Andy Flula and his team, his wife Simone is charming and helps out. The drivers they had, I have to say, I know people I sent videos back to here said, oh, it looks like you're pushing it a bit. And I said, I know it looks like it, but honestly, it's really not. As I said, that day I turned around and walked away from a takeoff. When I just calmed down and thought, well, what actually happened? Well, nothing actually. It looked a bit scary, but everything was fine. And I never saw, I can honestly say, hand on heart, I never saw anybody have a problem on a tow the whole time I was there.
But you were with world-class pilots. Now, if you had had a bunch of ordinary,
Lords.
and me.
normal pilots, the whole thing may have been very, very different.
I think it comes back to what Andy said, really, and I try and drill it into people over here as well about managing risk and risk assessment. So I went out flying here on a Saturday, for example. Okay, so I've just come back from Brazil. I hadn't flown for 2 months, by the way. I go up the hill with a guy who's been flying 3 years. It's pretty windy. He manages to take off in the end by very good ground handling skills. He ran nearly 100 meters down this mountain to get off it in the end. It was so crossed. But he got off. He's flying above me. He was flying above me for nearly an hour. I tried to take off 5 times and couldn't. And I thought, look, you're on your own. This isn't sensible. You know, it's not your day. I know he's flying, but, you know, call it a day. Some days you have to back. And I said to Richard earlier, I'd packed everything away, everything. I was just picking up my rucksack. I stood up and I thought, hang on, the wing's dropping. And I looked up and I thought, yeah, he's definitely a bit lower. So I walked down the mountain a bit to where I could see a clear area. Never taken off from there before. Laid it all out and I thought, right, just give yourself one go, because if you can't do it clean, it's not your day. And it went straight up and I flew for an hour and a bit. But is that, so I'd say you always just have to, and the other thing I did was stand there and try to make sure I wasn't just seeing what I wanted to see, because I find that's another issue. And it's been an issue for me in the past, that sometimes you see what you want to see, and afterwards when you look back, you think, no, actually it wasn't doing that. I was just making it look like it did to myself.
It did look pretty hardcore, Duncan.
Yeah, I enjoyed it though. I mean, it was, apart from that last day, I mean, there's always a risk with dust devils here as well. So that's normal for us here too. But apart from that last day, when it was just unfortunate, I landed in that really lumpy stuff. There was no big issue really. I mean, I say, as long as, you know, you don't go in for a landing half switched off, you're absolutely on it all the way down. So say that one I showed you where I fell over backwards, I just knew I had to roll straight over, get up and get the wing down, because otherwise it's going to be a problem. And I think as long as you're prepared, I mean, there is more risk, you can't deny that, obviously, because you've got more wind, you've got more turbulence, you've got more chance of things going wrong, or if you make a mistake, like try and do a low save and then you suddenly realise you shouldn't have, then yes, it's possibly going to hurt. I think I'm quite a cowardly pilot and quite a cautious pilot. I'd certainly go back there again. The guys were really good. The winching was really good. The retrieves were excellent, apart from one day when it went horribly wrong, but that wasn't their fault really. And the accommodation was fine. I mean, it was all very well run. Andy is a very good guy, I think, to guide you. I mean, he'd always make it clear it was your decision whether you take off or not. But he was saying that, you know, some of the very good pilots there, he was saying their risk assessment sometimes was absolutely appalling, and they ended up injuring themselves doing something really stupid. He said, yeah, that's always, I think, you know, a lot of us have been flying a while, or maybe not so long. I think a lot of us recognise that that is generally the problem. As I keep trying to drill it into the younger people here that, you know, you've got to consider what you're doing, because this is a serious sport. But I would recommend it if you a big distance with a good crew and you're prepared for the long days and getting fairly tired some days. I would give it a go. Otherwise, Andy does do I think he does 1,000 XC camp as well, where they winch from somewhere every day, fly 200k and land, go to a hotel, next day winch again, fly 200k and off hotel. So he has a couple of others in Brazil as well, which are more of a holiday and less of a boot camp.
Yes, it didn't look too much of a holiday, Duncan. I'm just very conscious that Duncan, it's 20 to 12 for you now, 20 to midnight. Any more questions for Duncan? What I found a very interesting talk.
Yeah, just a quick one, Duncan. Would you describe the air that you were experiencing as rough compared with UK conditions, or softish? What kind of flying was it?
Yeah, so so after the first couple of hours, once you got past about 9:30, it obviously started to liven up a bit. First 2 hours, as I say, very gentle. I mean, you had to be so gentle with everything. You were just trying to, if you lost a meter, you'd be thinking, oh, come on, I want it back, I want it back. But when it started to get going, I mean, that day when I was at 100 feet, as you could see, it was hard to get down. It was 4 to 5 meter a second climbs. It wasn't that day, actually, it was a different day. I remember having, on the Delta, you got the sea riser steering.
Yeah.
I remember actually lifting myself out of the seat to catch a front collapse. I clearly remember doing that. I actually lifted myself out of the seat because I felt it go. I got it back, all right, just stopped it, but it was really quite hard. But for me, so what I can say, it was not as bad as flying in the summer. So for me, it was fine. I would say for normal UK flying, it would probably be fairly strong, but I'm just thinking now, you said it, because it was strong, but let's say apart from that one bad time I got whacked, it wasn't really, it was strong, but it was all manageable, you know.
Thanks, Duncan.
Any more questions for Duncan?
Yes, I remember that little holiday pamphlet in the magazine. Was it in the fine print, but it said it was a boot camp? Was it misadvertised?
No, well, he did send a sort of schedule round, sort of indicating this, but actually moved it forward half an hour as well, little bugger. So it got even worse. But no, James, because I say I'm sure in some of the videos I saw on YouTube, there was definitely one, but maybe it was taken on one of the other safari holidays he did. Because as I said, this was really was driven by the record chasing and the big flights, and they would try and take off at like 6:15. If they weren't off the ground by 7 o'clock, for them it was really getting a bit late. Whereas me, I would generally try and wait until sort of 7:30-ish, because I didn't need to do 450 kilometers. I knew I wasn't going to do that time. So for me, you know, 7:30, 7:45, when you're making it a bit easier on yourself, a bit less stress in those first hours trying to stay up, that, you know, that makes perfect sense. As late as you can, really. Except for the fact that if you bomb out, if you're too late, you won't get a second restart. So it's kind of just judging how to make the best of it in that way, tactically.
Okay.
Yeah,
Any more? Sorry, John.
Last one. Someone's going to ask, how's your dad?
Well,
He's passed away.
unfortunately, Johnny passed away. He passed away a few days after I got back. But
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, he was 91. But it was quite fateful, actually, John. You say that because that day I chose to land at 150k. Had I carried on, I would not have got back to the hotel the next day. So I landed 150k, got back. The next day I bombed out early. And when I got picked up it was probably 9:15, I got a message from my brother saying he wasn't expected to last till the weekend. And I was able to catch a plane back that night and get back to see my father on Wednesday night, which was the last time he was able to speak to me. So had I not landed at that 150k, I wouldn't have had that last conversation with him. So it kind of worked out fatefully, if you like, really, which is why I kind of feel I ought to go back. It seems, well, that was kind of pre-planned in some way. But no, I mean, my father's 91, he'd been ill for some time, and I'm sure, like so many know these situations, it became more of a relief in the end. So, yeah.
All right, Duncan, I think we better let you get to bed.
All right.
I would like to thank you for this is a great evening. Certainly thoroughly enjoyed that. And we'll all thank you in the usual way.
Thank you, Duncan.
Very kind of you. So I should be out on my paramotor tomorrow, hopefully, and then doing a bit of hike and fly on Thursday.